Our first panelist is Sister Barbara Jennings with the Sisters of St. Joseph Crondelet. Not Crondelet, Crondelet. Is that right, Sister? And is the coordinator of the Midwest Coalition for Responsible Investment, a faith-based coalition of 20 Catholic religious communities that are faith-based individuals and investment managers. MCRI works with corporations to improve their environmental, social, and governance reporting and practices. Sister Barbara has been involved in social concerns, contemporary moral issues, and university teaching since the 1990s. Please welcome Sister Barbara. Jane Ponzi is our second guest, and she's been a strong resource of environmental education around the greater St. Louis area for over 25 years. As Green Resources Manager for the Earthways Center of Missouri Botanical Garden, she coaches sustainable thinking and practices across this region's businesses, homeowners, and educational communities. She also hosts and produces the weekly radio show Earthworms on KDX HX-FM and Growing Green St. Louis at KTRS AM. And this is her second speaking engagement for the evening. Third speaking engagement. So we welcome Jon Benigas, please. And join us remotely. We're working on it. Okay. I'll go ahead and introduce him. He'll be joining us shortly here. Bob Inglis is the Executive Director of the Energy and Enterprise Initiative and is guided by the conservative principles of free enterprise and economic growth, limited government, liberty, accountability, and reasonable risk avoidance to solve our nation's energy and climate challenges. Before starting E and EI, Inglis represented South Carolina for 12 years in the U.S. House of Representatives. So as soon as we get him, if you would give him a warm welcome to St. Louis. I believe he's joined us from South Carolina. Bob Inglis, welcome to St. Louis. Can you hear us okay, Mr. Inglis? Can you hear us?
Oh, yes, I can hear you, yes.
Thank you. Welcome, Bob. So we'll give each of the panelists just a few minutes to make initial statements. And Bob, welcome. Would you like to start with some initial comments?
Well, happy to talk about some answers on energy and climate that may surprise some because there's concern free enterprise, so that's what I'm talking about.
Okay, our connection is a little bit rough. We're breaking up, Bob, so we'll see if we can improve that here.
Okay.
That might be a little better. Okay, and so Sister Barbara, would you like to make any opening comments?
I just appreciated the film very much, and I hope to make some connections with the work that we do in the Midwest Coalition with corporations who are involved in energy provision for all of us.
Thank you. And Jon Benigas, opening comments.
Thank you very much for inviting me to be here tonight in Maryville and the Town and Country Green Speaker Series. I work for the Missouri Botanical Gardens, so I often have to be careful what I say politically. And we're talking about energy here, we're talking about policy, we're talking about people's values. Those are always topics that enter the discussion when we talk about anything having to do with the environment. Because the environment includes all of the living things on Earth, all of the interrelationships between those things, all of the natural systems, and human impact on those systems. Our impact, we're up there with the sharks and the tigers and the polar bears at the top of the food chain. We are a very impactful species, and there are a lot of us. I think it's about 7.6 billion humans on the planet now. And a couple years ago, I was at a talk that the Garden's recently retired president, Dr. Peter Raven, gave at St. Louis University. And he happened to cite on that day that world population had doubled in X time frame. I had just turned 52, I think. In my lifetime, the world population of humans had doubled at that time. 52 is a nice memory for me at this point. I mean, on the one hand, that's why it's so hard to find a parking place. But on the other hand, when you talk about human impact on the planet through sheer numbers and our habits and the discrepancy in what some have and some don't have, and how you have to either scuffle or the amount of consumption that you are responsible for, there are definitely human impacts on the planet. Representing the world of plants for the Missouri Botanical Garden, let me tell you, there is no question about human impact on the planet. That said, we may not always be the greenest bulbs in the array, but we have a fine history of being able to figure things out and work together. And I think that's one of our most important charges at this point, working together, not just letting somebody up there at the top of the human food chain make decisions that impact all of us and everything else on the planet.
Thank you. Bob, are you getting our audio feed well?
Yes, I can see you and the panelists. I'm not seeing the audience in the crowd. And
Great. Okay. So the next, what we'll do next is give you an opportunity to ask any questions of our panelists that you might have. So if you'd like to step to the microphone and answer your questions, please speak directly into the microphone so Bob can hear us well. And Bob, are you in South Carolina?
I'm in Washington at the moment, Washington, D.C.
Okay, great. So this is Washington. Anybody have a question for any of our panelists?
Yes, Mr. Congressman, I've heard you on, I believe, NPR or PBS, and I know you had a struggle over this topic, climate change, with some of your constituents and colleagues in your party, if I recall it right. What's your comment, perhaps, about how your party has trended, how they don't seem to be, in some parts of that party, very into science and the belief that climate change is occurring. They don't seem to believe the climate scientists.
Yeah. Well, I think that it relates to the Great Recession. And that is that, before the Great Recession, there was some talk of Republicans actually participating on energy and climate. But after the Great Recession started, it really all went south in terms of involvement on the energy and climate topic. So that's because basically, we were busted at the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We were reaching for self-actualization at the top, and then we got busted down at the bottom. And so that's what happened in the Great Recession, I think. And so, I think what we're going through is there are three camps on climate change. You got the hooey camp that says it's all hooey. You got the real but don't know why, and you got the real and human caused. I'm in the real and human caused camp, but once upon a time I was in the hooey camp. But what I've noticed is that the hooey category is shrinking. People are migrating from that camp into the real but don't know why camp. We hope that they eventually move into real and human caused. By the way, we have a little ad that we've tried out a little bit, which tries to make the point that, we hope it was basically this. It's got climate change written in the clouds, and so it's up in the clouds, there's climate change, there's lightning coming down out of clouds. And then there's an image that I found by searching sinners in the hands of an angry God. And so it's a guy preaching, he looks rather sinister in the pulpit. And so you got climate change in the clouds, and you got lightning coming down, you got the guy preaching. And underneath the pulpit it says, we better hope it's human caused. And of course, You know, that's so irrelevant that it's human caused. If it's not human caused, where in the world are we? If it's human caused, then there's something we can do about it. And but in the pain and Great Recession, there's a sense that no, we can't do anything about it. We got to focus on this month's mortgage payment, this month's paycheck. And so, you know, what happened to me personally was that I've been very successfully branded my campaign as all about energy security, and it sounded a lot about the future. But when people got busted to the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and they were talking about this month's mortgage payment and this month's paycheck, you know, they said, Inglis, sounds like you're talking about something a decade or two away, man. Get out of here. But here's the good news. It'll come back. The pain and Great Recession can let up, and we're going to find a search. America will be looking for a solution to this, I believe, within the next 2, 3, 4 years.
Let me just, before the next question, let me ask you, Jean, if you might answer this. Do you find that people interested in this kind of topic and the action behind it follows political lines, and if so, is that changing at all based on your experience?
Well, I tend not to pay as much attention to who's doing what politically as I pay to what's happening with data coming in, with reports, with action projects, with community engagement, with those kinds of things about the environment. One of the things that I'm very much aware of is that a major source of what I would consider, from environmentalist perspective, of misinformation about climate change is coming from the Heartland Institute, which previously was employed by the tobacco industry to convince us that there was no connection between tobacco smoking and any human health issues. So if you kind of follow that chain of information and you kind of follow that money and you kind of say to yourself, so-and-so is saying such and such, that changes the perspective and maybe gives us the opportunity to get off the hook of who's responsible, who's not responsible, and get with the program of dealing with our behaviors responsibly in response to what we see happening around us, whether that's typhoons or tsunamis or droughts or extended, disruption in seasonal cycles that are causing pollinators to go crazy or whatever that is. Can we have an effect on that? Yes, I believe that we can.
Thank you. Larry, you have a question?
I do, and thank you. My name is Larry Lazar, and I organize a climate change meetup group here in St. Louis, and also part of the Climate Reality Project. And we go around and do presentations and have meetings on climate change. I'm talking to the same people all the time. It seems like we're in these two little worlds, and those worlds don't connect anywhere. How do we get the message out that this is true when these worlds don't connect?
Sister Barbara, would you be interested in starting on that?
Oh, that's a good one. I think the word is growing, and we're going to be hearing more and more from corporations about how they're adapting and innovating. I was just at a meeting this morning with Peabody Energy, and the word that we have in common as faith-based people, as investors in the company that still want the company to do well, but also as faith-based, I think the word is innovation. And I know it's not, love or peace or all those things. It's what is going to bring about love and peace in this world, and not war, and not a horrible future for these young people in this room, and even younger, is we are human, and we can innovate. We can do more work on the smart grids, on our own energy efficiency, which I thought was wonderful that came out on this film so well. And we have to be ready for somewhat paying the price in the near future. I was at a lecture at Washington University a few weeks ago, and these were scientists that, they don't have any big environmental thing, they don't have any big faith thing, or political background, but they're saying in one generation we will be able to innovate, and we will be using less fossil fuels and coal, but it's going to take one generation, so let's say 20 years, before this is going to happen. That was their educated guess on this. So I don't know if that answered the question, Larry, but I do think that people are more involved, and as soon as their costs go up on electricity or down, they will notice. All of us are looking at costs these days. I would just urge you to look at what you get on your Ameren bill. Look at it carefully. Look at how Ameren itemizes your bill. Look at the programs they're offering for energy efficiency. Notice that they have just been required by the state to put in $92 million more on this program up until the end of 2014. Ameren wanted to cut that out. They wanted to stop at, I think it's been $92 million that they've already spent, which they were shocked because they didn't think that people would take advantage of their programs. Well, why did they have this program in the first place? Because the voters of Missouri said they wanted energy from renewables. So there's just all kinds of ways to approach this together. And I'm going to go back to that word, innovation.
Thank you. Bob, thoughts about energizing and activating the populace to conservative energy practices?
Well, I certainly agree that innovation is key to this. In fact, I'm very excited about hearing that, because it is, that's got to be our hope, is that we can innovate around this problem. We at the Energy Enterprise Initiative think that this is mostly an economics problem that has an environmental consequence. So if we fix the economics here, then the environmental will follow. The problem with the economics is that we have unrecognized negative externalities. As once called by a reporter for the Greenville News, he was asking about that, and I said something about we need to internalize the negative externalities. He said, "What did you just say?" And I said, I repeated it. He said, "Bob, I can't put that in this paper." And he said, we got to run to a 7th grade level. And I said, okay, we're going to reveal the hidden cost. That's what we're going to do. And then the economics will take care of them. So the economics will be fixed, the market distortion will be fixed, and then the environmental benefits will follow. And they'll follow because of what was just precisely mentioned, because of innovation. And to the question about how to get these two communities together, in other words, the left and the right, the people that listen to MSNBC and the people that listen to Fox. Maybe the way to get them together is just to understand both sides. And if you happen to be a progressive in the audience tonight, let me help you understand something about conservatives. Conservatives hear people talking about energy and climate, and they assume it's coming from the right and the left. And they assume that it means we're going to do with less energy. And somehow we're going to walk and eat bugs, or that we're just going to shiver or sweat in the dark, depending on what time of year it is. And so they reject that. They say, no, that's not us. We're not interested in shivering or sweating in the dark. And so if you can come to them with the idea that, no, because of innovation, we'll actually have more energy, more mobility, more convenience. And in fact, if you want to light up the undeveloped world, here's a great opportunity to do it. Because just as Africa, for example, has leapfrogged us in cell phone technology, skipping the whole phase of putting in fiber optics or cable to be connected. They skipped all that and went straight to cell phones. If we do this right, we can sell them the distributed energy systems to make it so they leapfrog our grid concept. Maybe they won't have a grid. Maybe it'll be a distributed energy system. And that innovation will light up Africa. And so, like I say, if we're smart about it, we'll be the ones maybe selling it to them, serving our customer there, making some money, and lighting up the world.
Thank you. Jean, would you like to comment on that?
I would.
What you're experiencing?
You know, the thing about, there's this group and that group, and how do you bridge that divide? Over the last 4 years, since 2010, as the lion's share of my job for the Earthways Center at Missouri Botanical Garden, I've been working with businesses in a program called the St. Louis Green Business Challenge. It's a program of the St. Louis Regional Chamber, our Chamber of Commerce. And they instituted this program back in 2010, and they needed some sustainability expertise. So they contracted with the Missouri Botanical Gardens Earthways Center to be resource advisor to this program, and I got the job. So they're sending a middle-aged Birkenstock-wearing, tree-hugging environmentalist feminist who looks like this into businesses to tell them what to do to green up their day-to-day business practice, which is the process. It's not change what you do for your business, but all the things that businesses do in common. Waste management, energy use, purchasing, water conservation, how do you manage your site, how do you negotiate your lease, what kinds of communications do you have with your employees, with your customers, with your supply chain, etc. So over the last 4 years, I have worked with almost 150 of our region's largest businesses that are rocking the process of finding the waste and getting it out of their supply chain and their day-to-day practice, and figuring out ways to make that profitable, sometimes by getting the budget line that buys the light bulbs to simply talk to the budget line that pays the utility bill, which is not always the case. Now, if businesses that we think of, that I used to think of as an environmentalist, frankly, as being a big culprit in environmental problems, yeah, in some ways they are, and in some ways individuals are, but what's out there in businesses are a lot of individuals that have the power to shift their thinking and bring leadership into the workplace. Many young professionals, many people who are no older than the individuals who are still in college in this audience, and in fact, that expectation of young professionals, the millennial generation that's out there in the workforce that grew up in recycling education programs, you know, like the kind our K-12 staff still offer. Those folks expect that corporate America will have a sustainability policy that has teeth, that functions. And so shift in thinking, how do you budget? How do you plan? How do you get rid of that waste? That is happening. And just yesterday I was in a meeting, and I forget the exact factor, but there's some number of trillions of dollars of assets in U.S. business investments alone, invested in companies that are participating in the Carbon Disclosure Project or the Global Reporting Index, which are measurability processes that get businesses to track their impact and reduce their environmental impacts. This is happening, and it's happening because it's profitable, and as business evolves to make that a more and more profitable thing, more and more businesses will come along. One of the drivers, Walmart, the world's largest retailer, which I frankly do not advocate shopping there. I advocate shopping at local businesses. And yesterday I had to go to Sam's to buy cheese and crackers for the biodiversity talk we just had at the garden because it's unfunded and we had 130 people RSVP. And it was creepy going into Sam's. I thought I was going to have a panic attack going into that store, and it's not going to become a habit. But the corporation that owns it is requiring all of their suppliers, if you want to sell stuff at the world's largest retailer, you participate in the Global Reporting Index and you set benchmarks and you achieve those benchmarks and you drop your impacts. That is a change. We need a lot more of that, and we need a lot more citizen understanding of that to make sure that continues to expand.
I would like to agree with Jean very much on that, that businesses are working on the Global Reporting Initiative, the CDP. There's one for water, that's a questionnaire. These are questionnaires. These are things that businesses have to fill out. They don't have to, it's voluntary, but very large corporations are doing this now. And it's mostly because of people pushing them to do this. And for instance, our organization just pushed Walmart, not here in St. Louis, but our group in New York, which is Interfaith, to keep going deeper on this whole Bangladesh issue of the labor and the fire, the building that collapsed, and so on and so on. But that Walmart is also doing some things saving water, saving electricity, etc. So we can't expect corporations to change overnight. How many of us change something overnight? Not too often, do we? So, but we have...
Underwear doesn't count.
Right. But we have to keep pushing.
Thank you.
Congressman, I would like your advice about a situation right here. Town and Country, where this event is taking place, is an affluent suburb of St. Louis. And the city is considering upgrading the building codes from the 2003 standards to 2012. But the city is not considering updating the residential energy efficiency codes because it's seen that it might be some kind of regulatory burden on the residents. And I know that the EPA says that buildings account for 36% of our energy use and 30% of our greenhouse gas emissions. So do you have any advice on what we could do?
Well, I guess what I'd say is that it's certainly something that is a concern, but I don't want to decide from Washington. If I was still in Congress, I wouldn't want to mandate the town and country to do anything. It's great, though, if it's implemented in the Constitution and allowing this kind of experimentation. That's the whole concept of this federal system that state and localities experiment. And so if the town and country wants to do that, I think that's great. I don't want them to be told to do that. If I were still in Congress, I would not want to tell them from Washington to do it. But it's also true, I mean, and I realize that, by the way, is a Republican answer, not a Libertarian answer. A Libertarian answer would probably be, no, we don't want those kind of requirements in place. But I'm a Republican, not a Libertarian. There used to be a difference. But I respect Libertarian views, and I think the difference argument here would be that builders in the residential context will advertise that their homes are more energy efficient. And I was just recently in Utah, and it's really interesting to hear about that going on. There's a particular development where the developer sells out immediately because of offering these very efficient homes, and people are seeking those out. But back to that innovation thing, the main thing that would cause that to happen is a price signal. If you were paying the real cost of electricity, we'd all be looking for this efficiency. It wouldn't be because any government mandated it. It'd be because it's in our enlightened self-interest to get more energy efficiency out of our homes and to get the waste out of our businesses. Because we'd be paying the actual price. Right now, what's happening is we're not paying the real cost of electricity. For example, it's so cheap in South Carolina that I can't even tell you what my per kilowatt hour cost is. But the reality is it's way more expensive than what's on the meter. Because if you consider, for example, the health effect of the coal-fired electricity that I'm using in my house, I'm paying for that unless Milton Friedman was wrong, which would be very hard to imagine. as a Republican, because you have two patron saints, one is Ronald Reagan, and the other is Milton Friedman. So, and if you're a conservative. So Milton Friedman, in the title of his book in 1975, there's no such thing as a free lunch. The reality is I'm paying the full cost of that coal-fired electricity. It's not the meter. I'm paying it through an opaque healthcare system. I'm paying for the guy right now in the Maryville hospital system that's on my Blue Cross Blue Shield plan. His my premiums are going up because he's ingested the soot out of coal-fired plants. He's at the hospital. He's on my insurance. I'm paying for it. There's somebody that's being seen there right now that's on Medicare. I'm paying for Medicare taxes. There's somebody in Medicaid paying for general taxes. And if they come in completely uninsured during the hospital system, I'm paying in the form of cost share for the next time I hire one of my family members to go there. So we're paying all right, we're just not paying the meter. If we paid the meter, then that innovation that we were just talking about would happen very rapidly. That's the free enterprise answer here, is just make it so we pay what it actually costs. And that, by the way, is something that libertarians can very much embrace. I declare myself a Republican, not a libertarian, but libertarians can very much embrace that kind of concept as well.
Thank you, Bob. Either of the panelists like to address that question? Okay, next question. I happen to be a personal example of what Bob was talking about, and if we have time, I'll share my experience in that regard. Go ahead.
My question is for Bob, too. I didn't want to I know there's been a lot of favoritism, but it's not every day you get the ear of a congressman. So, but I invite you to
How often do you get to talk to a nun?
That's true. That's true. I just got stopped. I should go sit down. Well, I guess my question is kind of on the political spectrum. In Washington, you have your climate deniers, and you have your three basic groups like you described, basically. Your climate deniers, your climate change deniers, and then your group that says yes, it's man-made, but we don't know why. And then you have your folks that accept climate change and they accept that it's man-made. So your three different groups. What in your opinion kind of fuels these three different groups, or what in your being on the side of accepting climate change as it is here, it is real? What in your opinion do you think fuels someone to deny climate change more, especially in the political spectrum? I mean, that's very important since those folks, they shape policy and they shape law and they shape people's perspectives, and they're always in the public eye, and they always talk, and they always they give their own opinions on certain things. What shapes their views more or less toward why they would be so adamant against climate change or accepting that it's man-made? I mean, in your opinion, since you're a conservative too, and a Republican on that issue, I mean, you'd probably know greater than anybody. Thank you.
Well, first of all, let me make sure you know, I got a new first name that's former, because I got specifically uninvited to the Tea Party in 2010 in the 4th District of South Carolina. But I guess I'm able where how Congress works, and I've been told who's there. And here's what I'd say is that there are a lot of reasons why people reject the science of climate change. I'll just give you two, one charitable and one that's pejorative, right? So the charitable view among them is that the reason that conservatives especially reject the science of climate change is they feel like we've seen this movie before, that the environmental left is ginning up hysteria. They can cram down some regulations, increase taxes, increase the size of the nanny state, and reduce liberty. We've seen it before. So, for example, my wife and I have 5 kids. One of them is 28. Our oldest is 28. When he was a little baby, there's great fear that was generated about ALAR. ALAR was a spray with apples, and it was going to kill all of us, including our children. Well, didn't turn out that way. Robert was 30 pounds in a year. I was 33 pounds in a year. You don't know babies that big. So we survived just fine. He's now in medical school, University of California, San Francisco, so he's doing real well. The point being that we've seen this before, ALAR and various other things. You zap hysteria from the left, drive through regulations, increase taxes, increase spending state. And so conservatives say, we don't want to do this again. So that's the charitable view about why conservatives might be rejecting the science of climate change. Now, on the pejorative end of that scale, there really is a spectrum between these two polar ends. The pejorative end would be something like this: that, if we admit the science of climate change is correct, then it would be incumbent upon us to change. But if we don't want to be changed, or we don't want to change our lifestyle, then it's better that we adopt the science than that we declare ourselves to be selfish. So, which would be better to say, I don't want to change and I'm selfish and to heck with my great-grandchildren. That seems pretty nasty. So better that the science is wrong. That's what we're dealing with. It's somewhere on that spectrum of where people are. But there are about a dozen other reasons between those two as to why we're rejecting science. But what we hope to communicate to people is enterprise initiative is based on the evidence. 97% of climate scientists say that climate change is real and human caused. If you want to go looking for the three, it's not conservative. And in fact, it's a very risky proposition to go seeking out the three. It's sort of like if, doctors, 97 doctors tell you to get surgery for your son, are you really going to go look for the other three? Or are you just going to take their advice and go ahead and get the surgery? But getting that message through has been difficult in Payne's Great Recession, but that recession is letting out. And as it lets up, I think we're going to be able to talk with conservatives. By the way, one other pointer about talking to conservatives, I'll offer these throughout the evening here. Pointers on how to talk to your uncle, who's that conservative guy that, maybe Thanksgiving's coming up, he's going to be there at the dinner table with you. And so here's what you might say to him is, Uncle, what we're going to talk about is reasonable risk avoidance. We'll stop talking to you, sir, about apocalyptic visions. Because somewhere on that spectrum I was just talking about, is another thing that comes to play, is if you tell me the apocalypse is upon me, well, denial is a pretty good coping mechanism. So I'll just deny it. But if you tell me, listen, we've got risk, there are ways to move against that risk, then I can cope with it. And I start, and I'm willing to hear that information. So at Thanksgiving, talk to that uncle. Don't talk to him about New York City, blah, 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 blah. Because he'll turn on me. Talk to him about, even if you believe New York City is about blah, 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 blah. Talk to him about how before it, let's move against it.
Thank you, Bob.
I would just agree with Bob that the word risk is very important to corporations. They understand that language, and even though it scares them to death, because all of this has to do with water risk, the shortage of water, how they are impacting our water, and how they will have to change. And as Bob said, change is very scary. So, but again, I agree with Jean. These are human people. And when you challenge in a respectful way, they are more ready to listen. Plus, if you have your facts in a row. So, that's just, some observations of agreement with him. And I remember the Alor scare of apples a few years back. Didn't last very long. but I think, wasn't there something that they took that film off of the apples after that happened? Bob, I don't remember, but it didn't last very long because they found out it wasn't really true. But this whole thing of climate change is not going to go away.
Jean, thoughts?
Well, I'm sitting here thinking about other ways in which human beings like to sort of muddle around about questions like, is it or isn't it? Does he love me? Doesn't he love me? And the way in which our species likes to kind of, dig in and ruminate about those things. And what I loved your statement, Bob, about when faced with an insurmountable problem, one of the coping mechanisms is denial. And the planet's climate and its condition, whatever that condition is, that's a pretty big problem. It's a pretty big thing to talk about, let alone to have to deal with. So, I also thought about the part in the film where the folks went door to door in a primarily African-American community. This was not like, privileged white folks talking to other privileged white folks. This was getting out there into the community and going door to door, getting people to change their light bulbs, and getting people to, hear about ways in which you can cut your waste of something and, not coincidentally, cut your utility bill, the person-to-person interaction that was responsible for that success. And I think that's one of the most powerful tools that we have to deal with a big issue like climate change, in the same way that it helps that we can deal with a big issue like diversity, breaking down barriers between races and gender and relational preference and all that kind of stuff. It's by working with each other one-on-one, whether it's in our neighborhood, whether it's getting engaged in a citizen movement to communicate with your board of aldermen or your decision makers or whatever, whether it's talking to your family and getting your family engaged. I mean, my husband is Mr. Mood Lighting. He has dimmers on every switch in our house and those little touch off things. Compact fluorescent light bulbs don't work with those things. So we have a hoard of incandescent light bulbs in our basement against the day when you can't buy them anymore. But you know what? We're going to switch them out to LEDs as we can afford that, even though the CFLs are not in those fixtures yet. And that's a thing that he and I have to work out. And he's married to Green Jean Ponzi. So do not underestimate what the phenomenon of Facebook and people thinking that they have 7,000 friends, and that what that represents to human beings in our population when we're more and more isolated from one another. That going door to door, that having a conversation one-on-one, that being in a community garden or being in a tool sharing program in your neighborhood, those are the human technologies that need to work with the energy technologies that we saw tonight, that need to work with the policy-making technologies, and we need all of that.
Another question.
This is primarily for Bob, and want to pick up on the kind of the economic side of that. And I think you laid a big part of the groundwork in terms of trying to go for the risk avoidance, but it's a whole notion of, can we go, we've got the innovation side, we've also got the economic side, and how can we try to leverage that to perhaps get away from all of the the arguments, is it real, is it not, and try to, so the bottom line is, what do you see as ways that we can, let's just start with the conservative side, because there's a completely different flip side when you start going to the liberal regulation side, but how can we, is there a way that we can cut through to putting a price on carbon, selling that to the group that doesn't want to buy in because they're fighting against climate change? If we can get that side on board, we can leverage that against the environmentalists that think you have to regulate things away. So any strategies, I think, taking the risk avoidance part of that in there and kind of buying cheap insurance for things, but any things that you see in terms of strategies, in terms of, let's just start with conservative side, how can we try to get them more quickly on board with putting a price on carbon, so all of that stuff that you talk about being hidden costs, that we make it real, we level the playing field, and we try to move forward using economics to our advantage.
Yeah, great question. So here's what I'd say is another one of the reasons I gave you two polar ends of the spectrum, right, from the very favorable to conservatives and then the majority in that spectrum. Something that would come sort of toward the middle of that might be this, that there's this assumption that if you acknowledge the problem, the solution is a bigger government. And that's what we at Energy and Enterprise Initiative live to break that connection. We want to show conservatives that no, the assumed solution is not bigger government. It's actually a smaller government. That you can do this with only role for government is being the honest cop on the beat. It says all cost in on all the fuels. And by the way, eliminate all subsidies for all fuels. No more production tax credit for wind. No more subsidies for ethanol. No more mandates for ethanol. Eliminate all the subsidies. Eliminate all the mandates. And then put all the cost in. Because the biggest subsidy that exists today is the ability to belch and burn for free without accountability for emissions. Put that on the fuels. Make them all accountable. And then, that's the only role for government. It's not the role of the government. And so, when conservatives start hearing that, they think, oh, well, then maybe we could entertain the problem then. Because, it's sort of like this. If I tell you, here's the plan of surgery for that back problem you've got. First, we're going to remove your head. Then, after we get your head off, we're going to work on your spine and put your head back on. Thanks, Doc. My back is feeling a lot better. I don't think I need any surgery. Right? You go back and you just problem because you say the solution is anathema to you. Leslie?
Wait.
We lost our connection here.
Speaking of problems, I think I've lost my internet connection. I'm back.
You're back.
Oh, there, you're back. I'm back. I'm back. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can hear you, Bob.
Okay. So, one other thing I tell you, one other thing I pass along to you, to get ready for that Thanksgiving dinner with the uncle that I was just putting at the table, is talk to him about what the insurance industry is doing. Our friend Eli Lehrer at the R Street Institute points this out. He's a reinsurance expert. And he points out that if you're in the insurance business right now, casualty insurance, and you wanted to pick up a whole big book of business, just get your actuaries to put a zero in the column for climate cost. And you can undercut the competition and sell a lot of insurance because people would come flocking to your company to be insured. But he points out that no insurance company is doing that. They don't. They will not put a zero in that column. In fact, they are putting numbers in that column because they're experts at pricing risk. So, Uncle, when you're talking to him at the Thanksgiving dinner table, point out that don't you conservatives normally listen to the insurance company firms that you've got? Well, listen to them in this case. They're pricing the risk of climate change, and they're planning on staying in business. So that's just another way of having that conversation with the conservative uncle at the Thanksgiving table.
Thank you, Bob. Sister Barbara, do you have some thoughts about that?
Well, again, I would agree with Bob, and I've heard this more and more, is to get rid of the subsidies, let the companies do the research and pay for it themselves, and not have, our government pay for research, tax breaks, land leases, for instance, for coal mines, and also not for solar, et cetera, so that it's an even playing ground. And secondly, our insurance is one of those hidden costs of our cheap electricity, is our insurance, homeowners, et cetera, is going up. There's huge discussions going on the East Coast after Sandy. Should we allow people to move back over there onto the beaches? Remember the flood of '93 in St. Louis? Should we allow people to live down by the river? The whole town moved up off of the river because they said we're not going to go through this again. And so should we allow our tax money to pay for people who insist on living or having their resort on a beach? Who's getting the advantage of our tax money? That's what we have to continue to do.
Thank you. Jean, any thoughts?
Yeah, my thought has to do with levels of government. Now, you're talking about the federal government there, former Congressman, and your question, I think, was about the federal government. I'm not holding my breath for the federal government at this point in time to take a leadership role on response to climate change, although I was very pleased when the Obama administration ordered all the governmental departments about a week ago to develop resiliency plans. That was an extraordinarily underreported piece of news. Every federal department must develop a plan, what's now called resiliency in my profession, of response to situations that are changing relative to climate change, climate factors based on climate science. And I want to emphasize, however, the importance of local government and the importance of each one of us revisiting in our minds what our concept of government is. One of the most important things to me is it's an aggregation of all of our buying power. It's an aggregation of all of our decision-making power. And in many ways, that decision-making power has been co-opted by the buying power of other, much larger entities, corporations, major giving pools, et cetera, et cetera. There's some big systems there that need to be fixed. But in the same way that a municipal government will let the trash collection contract for all of its residents, and now will roll in recycling, and in some places will roll in other services that everyone needs in common, that's the kind of buying power that our collective institutions like government or like a school district, as opposed to every single kid or every single classroom, has. And how can we reclaim the benefits of that collective buying power, that collective representation, so that it really works for us? At a local level, perhaps at a county level, at a state level, I think we really have some capability there. At the federal level, I think we need some serious reforms in order for that to happen.
Thank you. You have a question?
Jean, this one's for you. During your introductory statement, you went at quite good length to talk about how population was doubled in your short lifetime. Has your organization ever considered making any exhibits or presentations about potentially getting people to think about having smaller families?
Well, no, you mean the garden?
Yes. Just as part of one of the many answers towards.
I don't know if we have or not. To the best of my knowledge, we have not, because our mission is to discover and share knowledge about plants and their environment in order to preserve and enrich life. But when you talk about human impacts on plants and their environment, yes, we do address population issues. And we do dovetail our efforts with other organizations, primarily environmental or educational or research-related organizations that are dealing with those kinds of things. I can tell you from my experience as a radio talk show host, this is one of the least talked about issues, is population-related issues. And one of the most important things about population-related issues is the education and the empowerment of women and girls. And here we are still kind of hopefully at the tail end of the patriarchal era where we see values, our values, and the way in which our language works. Does that empower women and girls? Are we aware of the kinds of ways in which in other countries where we have less freedoms, where we have sexual slavery, where we have children being sold, those kinds of things, do we take action about those kinds of issues when we know how our purchasing choices impact those things? And how do we react still when we see leaders, when we see corporate leaders? It's the same way in which diversity advocates, human diversity advocates, ask us to examine our most deeply embedded attitudes about race, our deeply embedded attitudes about the worth of different kinds of humans based on gender. Those are things that I think are really important to ask. And whether or not women's studies, whether or not feminist history, women's history, cultural history, those kinds of things are still in college curricula that may or may not be appropriate for high school curricula, that's the education and the empowerment of women and girls is a very, very important thing at an international level. And this is like me speaking, this is not me on behalf of the Missouri Botanical Gardens, so this is off the record. But I think one of the best things we could have would be about a 2-generation moratorium on guys in office.
Sorry, I think that was a setup, Bob. What are your thoughts about that?
There's something not to talk to Uncle Charlie about at Thanksgiving. If Uncle Charlie, the conservative at Thanksgiving, please, if you're trying to help us reach Uncle Charlie, the conservative, please don't talk to him about that. Because it will affirm all of his stereotypes about the environmental left, and he will dismiss them as a bunch of wackos. In fact, what you might want to know is the replacement rate in the United States is actually almost not at replacement rate. The population replacement rate is, we're not quite replacing our population. Elsewhere in the developing world, or the developed world, that's the case, it's actually negative in some places. So the challenge is, as we just heard from Jean, in the developing world, where you've got a different scenario. But it really does, it affirms all of it's like, there are these things that we don't realize that are offensive to people we're trying to speak to. So, for example, I was speaking to a bunch of scientists a while back, and I told them, when Carl Sagan, who's dead now, but when he ran his television show, and he said on that show, the cosmos is all there is, all there ever will be, all there was, all there is, all there ever will be. He was offending most of my Republican constituents that I represent in the red district in the red state of America. And he was actually making a statement of faith, or really non-faith. But he didn't realize it. And what was fascinating to me is about 1,000 scientists there, they came up to me in droves afterwards saying, "Really? We didn't know that. That's a statement of faith." I said, "Yes, it's a statement of non-faith." And so I suggested to them, if you're speaking to a believing audience, particularly evangelical Christians, for example, don't talk to them about how the cosmos is all there is, all there ever will be, etc., because you're offending them. You're coming against their deeply held belief that, no, I'm a very special snowflake, and I was created by a creator God who wanted me here. I'm not an accident, and I'm not an invader of the creation. And that's another thing the environmental left needs to understand, is that Uncle Charlie thinks that what he hears from the environmental left is, oh, we're not supposed to be here. It's supposed to be just bugs and animals and tigers and elephants. And we're not supposed to be here. Well, how does that make the human feel? I mean, we got to say, I mean, if you want to approach this, if you're trying to reach Charlie at Thanksgiving, tell him, no, you're supposed to be here, Charlie, and we're glad you're here. And then he can hear you talk about reasonable risk avoidance. But if you give him all that stuff about population control, he's going to turn you off immediately.
Actually, I wasn't looking towards population control at all. I wasn't looking towards population control at all. That's the reason why I didn't ask you on that. As a matter of fact, I wanted to make sure that it was voluntary. By the way, I am a registered Republican, conservative in many ways, but I also see, even though the population is leveling off, the population of the consuming class, the middle class that is creating all the gases, is increasing dramatically around the world. Not here in the United States, but China's per capita consumption doubled in the span of 10 years. That's the reason why the population doesn't need to level off. It needs to go down in order to not emit any more gases than we are currently, which I know put a lot of people, but I wanted to make sure that it is voluntary. I just want to get it on the radar screen as something that should hopefully be considered when someone chooses their own family size, and I underscore chooses.
Yeah, well, and make sure to avoid the Malthusian assumption. You know, because the word we started with was innovation. And Malthus was proved wrong by innovation. So, you know, there was a time when the projections of horses in New York City was going to result in manure at the 7th floor level. Because you know, go up to the streets up to the 7th floor were going to be manure because of the projections of the increased population, the increased horse use. Well, along comes a guy named Henry Ford who innovates, and we don't have that problem with manure anymore. But here's the point we like to make the energy and enterprise district. Imagine how much faster that innovation would have happened if New York City had stopped scooping poop at public expense and made it so you had to scoop your own poop. So when your horse pooped, you had to get that off your horse and scoop it. Not rely on the city to do that, because if you didn't subsidize that cost, if we had people actually responsible for their negative externalities if they're from their horse, then Henry Ford would have sold cars a lot faster. Because people would have been thinking, gee, I don't like this. I don't like to carry this around in a bag behind my horse. I want those horseless carriages. Now we need to innovate again, because now we understand we didn't know then, but now we know that those horseless carriages are putting out an awful lot of CO2 and other pollutants and things that we need to cope with. But just with a price signal, I believe, this is my faith in the free enterprise system, that free enterprise can develop some alternatives. I was at the Natural Gas Association today, two of them today, here in Washington, and one of the steps is natural gas for transportation. Pretty exciting. Reduces the amount of pollutants, reduces CO2. So innovation is really important.
We promised you to get you out by 9. We ran over just a little bit. I think some of our panelists are willing to stay a little bit later to take some additional questions if you'd like. But we want to thank our panel for being here this evening. Congressman Bob Inglis from South Carolina. Thank you very much. Appreciate you joining us. Sister Barbara Jennings, thank you for joining us tonight. Center for Sustainability here at Maryville for hosting this and making this possible, and the green team from Town and Country, but most of the energy was from Dirk Moss, and so we want to give him a round of applause. I want to remind remind you just of two things. One, I was given a quite interesting pamphlet of a presentation that's going to happen Tuesday, November 19th, so next Tuesday at the St. Louis Zoo. It's called Energy Production Meets Biodiversity. And it's an evening presentation that will go from 5:30 to 9. And I'll leave this here in front, so if you'd like to get more information about that, you can. And then just one more reminder that next Thursday, the 21st, lost my notes here. Is it the 21st? The last installation of this series will occur here at Maryville, and you're welcome to attend, and that'll also be at 7 o'clock. Our host for that event will be Skip Mange, an alderman from Town and Country, said he's here tonight, and Tim Welby, also an alderman from Town and Country, is here joining us, so thanks for being here. And those people who are interested in the upgrading the building codes and energy efficiency codes, you have two aldermen right there to talk to. We'll be skipping out the back door, so you know. Thank you for being here tonight. Again, panelists, thank you very much for your time. Appreciate your thoughts, and wish you a good night. Drive safe.
And we want to thank Gene Ponzi also.